Brian.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. We're in the thick of the summer here. And
Yeah.
I think we've actually made it to the monsoons.
Uh-huh. It's
So
coming regular now.
it's coming. It looks a bit more regular, and every time I wanted to do something outside, a thunderstorm came up. So
Yeah.
that's kind of good fortune, I guess.
Yeah, you gotta get your outside stuff done in the morning, huh?
Yeah, that's what I usually do. But
Yeah.
but so yeah, so I'm doing good.
Good. Well, I had like a couple of things point at this topic, and I'm not sure where it's gonna go exactly, but one thing is Brian Koberger is getting sentenced today, and he's the madman who just decided to plead guilty to murdering those four kids
What a weird
in
case.
Idaho. A
Weird
really
case.
weird case. And as I was thinking about that and like what our topic for today might be, I also our episode about Hitler flashed in my mind. And we had talked about maybe his oratory skills being what differentiates him archetypally in our collective consciousness. And I realized that I disagreed with that, although it's true, it's certainly a factor. But for me, what differentiates him is his madness. And it just got me thinking about the role that madness plays in society, in art, in expanding our consciousness and expanding how we relate to the world, in politics, like especially politics writ large. Like back in the day, madness drove conquest sometimes and changed the face of civilization.
As in the madness of the crowds.
And there's the madness of the crowds, right? Which shows up in all kinds of ways. Um, so, right, there's this individual um, lens on it. There's a collective lens on it. There's internal and external, of course, always.
And there's in the light
Um,
and in the shadows.
so I was curious what you think about madness and the role that it plays, and also whether you know anything offhand about how other thinkers and writers have kind of tried to integrate the idea of madness into their worldview, or what has madness represented
Right.
in the past too?
Well, there's two models that I have that I think in most worldviews, people will argue you need to pick one or the other. But somehow, to me, they overlap. They're mutually significant. Okay, I worked in the psych ward when I was younger, and so I've seen most of the menu, like most of the items on the madness menu, and uh, I think the thing that's unique about us today, well, this thing happened, this thing named Sigmund Freud, and they claim, they will refer to Sigmund often as the discoverer of the unconscious mind, with this idea that the aspects of our mind, both collective and individual, are bigger than what is in the daylight of our awareness, you might say. And that's why I said the what's in the light and what's in the shadows. And you know, for example, I thought immediately when I think of the madness of Hitler, I think of the passage of him beholding the spear of destiny, which was supposedly the spear that was stabbed in Christ's left side. And the mythology since then has been that whoever holds the spear of destiny will control the world. Pretty Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff, it's like so. And I thought I heard that it was in the Smithsonian, but anyway, I digress. Um,
I think I heard that he had it for a while, Hitler did, and then he lost it. sometime in 1944 or 1945.
when things unraveled.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's that's the
D&D is
thing.
what it is.
If you do business with demons, they're tricky, right? But my point was that I think there is a passage in Mein Kampf where he talks about beholding this. And as I recall, I can't recall the specifics of the passage, but I remember walking away from it going, well, that's probably the most direct explanation, first person account of a demonic possession that you're going to get, right? And now that sounds like a poetic illusion. It sounds like maybe hyperbole, you know, like, wow, yeah, of course, because now we've
I know
discovered.
you mean it quite literally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because we're enlightened now, and we understand that there's the unconscious mind, and there are complexes, and there are professors that understand things, and but at the same time, I'm somebody that has done upwards of a couple hundred ceremonies with shaman, and for them, daimonios are very real. And I have to say that from my seat, white boy going into the indigenous tradition, seeing what I see, look seeing what they see when they point to something and say that, and we call it a this. Uh, these are not this worldview doesn't come from pure superstition. This worldview comes from pretty much the same process that ours comes from. That is, moving into it, trying to label things, trying to understand relations between those things, trying to understand our interactions with them, their responses, that what's going on here, and a need for a taxonomy of some sort. You got to have names for things, and then associate with those names. Now we can start to build some knowledge that can be passed on, and that's been an ongoing lineage for them for 10,000 years, is what my teacher said. And so while I don't want to give an absolute definition, I certainly know what they mean. And I have seen these, borrowing from what Harlan Ellison, these mind parasites, that there are energies that can exert powerful influences over individuals, and they can at times be overcome by these energies. That you might that is good a model of any is that these things swam up out of the collective unconscious, and that they overpowered the focus point that individual consciousness represented, and now all this unconscious material can pour forth. And I think we know that there are certain things, like I think this is one of the things that happens with a lot of methamphetamine use, is that it sort of opens a person up to these pernicious influences that come from using Freud's model, the collective unconscious. And until Freud, we just said, well, they're insane, but it's not like we had a great excuse. We did have we do have a tradition within within the Christian traditions, within the Catholic Church, of actually doing exorcisms. And those exorcisms look very similar in certain ways to the South American tribal responses to these things. So so if we stay too focused on the linguistic and the definition world, or if people just sit outside of the experience of these things and come to logical analyses based on their worldview that doesn't have a map of these things yet, then something's going to get missed here. Some important things are going to get missed.
Yeah, or they're just going to develop another taxonomy and not realize that it represents the same material just seen through a different lens as an existing taxonomy, which
A
is also incomplete.
but
But
that has
I,
techniques, that has a
yes,
technology and a
for
way to
sure.
move in that world that we don't have exactly yet.
We don't have those. We have different techniques in kind of the Western therapeutic um,
Yep,
tradition now,
yep,
which is 100 some years old,
yep.
not 10,000 years
That
old, right?
includes such hits as frontal lobotomies
Yeah,
and
and bottle inflamies.
and and
Yeah,
and and Thorazine, which is basically a
lithium.
frontal
Yeah,
lobotomy without all the messy ice pick part, you know?
yeah, for sure.
So, we have not
But
had
beating somebody with a guinea pig,
right,
there's that too.
right. Well,
So
and in all fairness, these are not easy problems to solve, and
I
this
wanted to
yeah.
ask though about like you kind of presented this model that's new to me, and I think it makes sense, but I want to talk about it a little more. So my model for how madness is transmitted is pretty low resolution, but it's something like um, from individual to individual, and that it's easy and through trauma essentially, um, or through imprinting, let's say, and trauma
Mhm, yeah,
is a conduit for imprinting.
yeah.
And I've thought metaphorically, and I think maybe we've talked about this a little bit about kind of transgenerational behaviors
I was
that are
just gonna
getting
say
passed down.
inheritance.
Yeah, that that happens um, through this conduit, right? Through the imprinting, um, and and the metaphor can be of a parasitic entity that exists even as people's lives come and go because it's able to live generation after generation through being imprinted onto others.
Mhm.
But I thought of that as metaphorical in a way that your model about emerging from the collective unconscious makes more literal. And I was wondering if you could say more about that because it kind of like makes the leap to there are actually things living in the collective unconscious, which through a shamanic lens is the model, but through kind of a Western psychology lens is more metaphorical.
Yeah, well, and I think that even when we talk about the collective unconscious, we tend to think that that's something that only humans might share because it's collective amongst humans. But if we think of mind as pervasive, maybe in some of the ways that we have explored in the podcast, the way that from physics to different philosophers, then we realize that this world, for example, the shamanic experience of the collective unconscious, seems to have a lot of plants and animals in it. In other words, that dimension it, encompasses all the places that mind at large touches. So that a shaman in South America, he might call the puma, he might call the plant a plant like ayahuasca or chacruna. He might call silver or gasoline, right? He might call
Volcano.
saints. He might call other shaman. He might call animals in particular. A lot of different animals. And within his world, they all have special types of knowledge and special they participate in this pervasive mind in their unique way. And so they are a particular thought of the creator that's taken form and that exists in the mental realm necessarily because it manifests because of us physically. We tend to separate these things, but they're not separate. That is the world of formation, where idea and mind starts to influence the formation of matter. but they're really the same, which even Lao Tzu tells us. We give them different names, but really they're the same. And I think that's what the physicists now are telling us. Some of these guys like Fajin um, uh, and I guess Langen's not really a physicist, but his model sort of starts to bridge across that. I think Bohm's model starts to bridge across that, and so we're clearly sniffing around something going on here. Well, the shamanic approach, I mean, I think that maybe people don't completely grasp that we can make ourselves open to pernicious influences. And this is one of the things that most indigenous traditions seem to have a pretty good grasp of, is like, mend your fence line. And, a great example is when I was sitting in one of those first ceremonies that I talked about in our episode called La Maravilla del Mundo. Uh, and there was a negative influence, let's say, that I could feel coming at me from a particular side of the room that was showing me, I think I mentioned it, snapshots of mute hands missing fingers and, stuff to go boo, basically. And it wasn't until I made the internal mistake of going, "What?" That then it was on me. That, as we say proverbially, like a pit bull on granny, right? I mean, and that was when the shaman I was working with put his hand on my thigh and all this stuff backed off. He touched me for maybe 5 seconds, and then my movie changed entirely. So but what that point, and then he told me later, as a remedy to that, he said, "Just keep your attention on the song, on the Icaro." But what that demonstrates is that there are psychic influences that we can, in a certain way, go, "What?" and open ourselves to, and then we may have a problem before we're finished dealing with that. And that's why a lot of traditions, they warn us off in ways that the older generations warn us of, and the younger generations go, "Oh, they're superstitious." The older generations say, "Don't make yourself open to these type of influences." And
One that came up for me in a really early ceremony was idle hands do the devil's work.
that's a good example of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the one you're talking about, I think, gets phrased as vampires can only come in the house if you invite them.
This is pretty much the energetic message of that
Yeah,
saying. Yeah,
yeah.
and
It's not a superstition. It's actually a practice.
yeah, and when I put something like, I had one around here that's a feng shui mirror, and it has the trigrams and it has a mirror, and you put it over a doorway or you put it somewhere, and the idea is that it's gonna reflect that whatever pernicious influences might come along. Well, that's a physical aspect, but what's significant here is the intent. That shows that you are carrying the intent to repel these pernicious influences, right? And that's what a lot of these sort of like habitual customs that we have. They're really about carrying a certain intent. And because that intent and where we steer our consciousness, uh, if you think about it, our consciousness is actually sort of trying to vacuum up experience to process it, right? Like that's sort of, this is part of what Bergson called the way the intellect moves to the world to organize matter, right? And so we're sort of out there vacuuming up what's out there, and we may do that indiscriminately, but it's a sort of a psychological thing. And that's why we say things like uh one bad apple spoils the barrel. because it only takes one pernicious influence, right? But what's the real message here is that we will function at our highest if our consciousness is conscious of our consciousness. And what that means is looking at what our awareness is and looking at what we let in through that mechanism, and that holding our intent actually has a sort of a prophylactic effect in certain situations, and that's why certain people we know are very vulnerable to influence, and we know that if they're in a certain situation they will succumb, and other people that have stronger influence, we know that if they go into that situation, the whole situation will have to alter around that because of the intention that those people hold. And I know that sounds maybe more quasi mystical than it needs to, but if you think about it, you'll have seen this effect at different times. And uh, so so no, there's an interesting thing that's going on there, and I do think that if we lose the if we lose perspective on our fear and our desire, we will more likely make the kinds of mistakes that will make us open to pernicious influence. I've said before that I actually have a one string banjo. I'm like a one string banjo, and it's all about virtue, right? Well, this is like, again, this is just another way into that same conversation. It's,
Yeah, uh, there are, I guess, a couple of maybe just a quick comment. I just want to note that some madness is not the result of
oh, absolutely.
um, of this attention. I just think that that bears saying. Um, this loss of focus in our attention. Let me put it that way.
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
some madness is, w- to me inexplicable,
Right.
but that I know that doesn't explain it.
Yep, yep.
Um, and then I wanted to kind of ask you about, well, what about the relationship between madness and the expansion of consciousness? And the first name that comes up for me is Van Gogh, but there are a million names. And I don't think Van Gogh would have probably been the brilliant luminary he was if he wasn't also open to pernicious influence.
Oh, as
And
he
what
obviously
about
is.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like there's so I would say there's like an evolutionary role that these pernicious influences can play in the
Sure,
expansion of
sure.
consciousness. What
And
do you
and
think about
and
that?
I do wanna reiterate what you said at the beginning of your comment, which is that, yes, there are many different flavors of madness. And there are when we look at those that are often come from early trauma, they will come we can still trace it back to, uh, the fact that when you're young, you have not developed the capacity to mend your own fences. So you are vulnerable. And if you're not protected by adults who should have developed that capacity, then yeah, you're not responsible. It's not about you having made a mistake. It's about you having been vulnerable to pernicious influences when you should have been protected by other people. So that's a whole category. And the other thing I wanted to say about this idea of daemonios, or these pernicious influences, is that it's like, when you're in the jungle, uh, the way that a puma is gonna attack you is gonna be very different maybe than the way that a giant boa might, and again, very different than the way a mosquito will. And yet all 3 can be, game over. But the way that they move, the way that they hide, the mechanisms they use, the way that they get, it's all different. And and the shamanic world translation of that is exactly the same. There are some things that are just minor pernicious things. There are some things that are, you know, uh, for a shaman, they're insignificant. And then there are other things that they call in their buddies to handle because it's more than one can handle. Right. And So just like in the jungle, there's big things, there's little things, there's sneaky things, there's ferocious things, there, you know, and that's where the power of taxonomy comes in, I think, because that's sort of the key of understanding the mental principles to be able to withstand these things. And that they don't we did an episode about how the things will find their way through your armor. Well, this is a version of that same thing. There's at some point, there's every one of these things is going to get every chink is going to get tested. And so that's part of it. I think that what that the first of all, the biggest implication of this all is that we don't know ourselves. We only know the part of ourselves that is in like the beam of the flashlight. And that all humanity is in that boat. Unless maybe if you want to talk about what so-called enlightenment or realization might mean within certain traditions, then it's going to that might pose the possibility of a human way out of that. But I think that again, it's the trip, it's not the destination. Something's getting done by all this. There's some it's like there's a price to be paid for every new bit of realization. Your cognitive model can be stretched a number of different ways, but some of those ways have extreme costs to be able to have the experiences that are necessary to get that map worth of data. And so, which is why we look to certain people who have paid that price in the spirit of true trusting is the Buddhist concept, I think. True entrusting, Shinjen, I think it is. And so the idea is that, well, if a real Buddha tells us something, we pretty much have to take it on, because we're not going to necessarily be able to to verify that in our own experience just yet. Someday, fingers crossed, right? But so yeah, Plato's Academy, know thyself, right? This is an old idea, although the idea of the collective unconscious or the unconscious mind itself is not. It was. I'm not going to say that nobody had that idea. I think they just used different words for it because it wasn't like these people lived without an unconscious mind. And I've made reference to Julian Jaynes and the break origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. And I think there's some other interesting theories about the origin of consciousness as a development. And so,
I mean, when you go back to like Greek myths, and the idea of destiny, essentially implies unconscious and a collective unconscious.
and the Sibyl and all of the
All the creatures, of course.
well, I mean all the temples that had mystical the Oracle at Delphi, for example, and things like that. What were they contacting if it wasn't some unconscious and some collective? And it
The
seems like,
muses.
there's some, psychoactives might have been used to catalyze that, traditionally. So, but they're mysteries, which means they don't tell it, right? Because there's a certain thing going on there that it's not like a club having a secret handshake. It's something much profounder going on in that case that's used to, uh, what's the word? As a filter to make sure that the initiate is in the right responsive state of mind so that when the information is transmitted, it's not profaned in any way.
Mm.
And that's not unique to that. That's like an idea that lends itself immediately when people have these realizations, right? Is that this is a pretty tricky thing. We better be careful about how we talk about it when we do, if we do, you know. And there are situations where any words are a lie. And those are the things where we're better to remain silent. And that's why Lao Tzu says that the true Tao can't be spoken. You know,
That's where I thought you were going.
yeah.
When it comes to, instructions are not readily available for interactions, at least through some modalities, with these unconscious dynamics or forces, partly because the instruction is experiential. I mean, you can't
Dispositional
explain to
knowledge.
somebody, yeah, you really can't explain to somebody what a ceremony entails and send them off to go do it.
No good books, even with pictures and diagrams.
Yeah. And I've seen some attempts. They're poor, poor
Right.
um, substitutes.
Well, you're getting the outside picture of an inside thing,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter.
It
Outside
really
doesn't matter
doesn't.
with an inside thing that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's why, some of these shaman in South America, we're talking about a little old guy in a dirty T-shirt with holes in it, and, the Western idea or the first world idea, 'cause these guys are as Western as we are, um, that first world idea is that, gee, if there's some sort of special knowledge of the other world, then that should show up in this world as all sorts of, sparkly this or that somehow. Where's your wizard's cape, for God's sakes? And but Saint Francis was dressed in rags, apparently. So there's an interesting, yeah, interesting thing that goes on there, and trying to map these on all onto one map is a bit tricky. But you can definitely there's something going on there. It's not like this is all random. There's definitely a theme running through it that can be distilled and distinguished with time and experience. But without experience, it's not possible.
Well, the idea of the collective unconscious um, was fleshed out a little more for me, interestingly, in what we've talked about so far. But I'm wondering if you want to come back to the comments about the relationship between madness and art, and that kind of being on the vanguard
Huh.
of the
Well,
evolution of consciousness in some way.
we've spoken a few episodes back about the uniqueness of language, in that we can speak science with language. We can make truth propositions with language, and we also can uh, talk about that rough beast that slouches towards Bethlehem. And wir reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind, right? Who rides so late through the wind and the night, and this whole, you know, and with those, like, look, I just got goosebumps from that. With those, we're talking about something that's beyond what we're talking about. We're talking about the things that start to move into the shadows, and that's where maybe art can work by giving a voice to unconscious elements. And I mean, I was just seeing the other day some of the black paintings by Goya. Oh, I mean, I'm not going to say that a poet couldn't do that, but it's not going to be a slouch. Like, there's something beyond words in art that definitely can be communicated, and there's no easy science about it. There's no way we can drag that out over to the rational side of the brain and say, well, we found that if the shades of gray or in black are exactly this tone, it stimulates the nervous system of, it's like, oh, go screw yourself.
It's just like the example we were talking about of, a book or a CD about how to go have a successful ceremony is going to be useless. Same problem.
Because we're trying to cross that same border. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing is that human consciousness can cross that border, though human understanding will lag behind. And, so there's a fascinating
You
thing
mean
right.
rational understanding, or
Yeah,
what do you mean by understand? Okay.
yeah. I mean, and in a very practical way. I mean, I think we've had situations and ceremonies where the understanding part came way later, but it was just like a download of direct information that, uh, the reason has to be strained out of it somehow through the application of a certain effort, but the reality of the thing we're talking about was never in question at all in that respect, any more than the reality of the rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem is in question. He was pointing at something, and if there was no such thing, there would be nothing to point to. No pointing would be inspired, right? So
And there probably wouldn't be goosebumps.
there probably wouldn't be goosebumps. Exactly,
Ooh.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And, for folks who didn't catch our last episode was all about, or no, I guess it just dropped, so it's a few episodes back. Episode 57, I think, is about that rough beast that we were referring to here. And relevant to that episode, for those of you that did catch that, the lion with the head of a man was a reference to the Sphinx. So anyway, just a show note that got late in a few episodes. Um, but
That makes sense.
so yeah, there's something going on that the Sphinx represents also. Is this like eternal mystery of what is man? And in fact, wasn't that the riddle? That was the answer to the riddle of the Sphinx. For those of you that don't remember, the riddle was what walks on four legs in the morning, on two legs in the middle of the day, and on three legs in the evening. And who was it that had to answer that?
I don't I don't know.
It
I
was
don't
one
remember.
of the heroes with a thousand faces. We'll say it that, referring to Joseph Campbell's parsing
Yeah,
of the thing.
that works.
And the answer
You or
was, of
me, or
course, man. In the morning of his life, he crawls on all fours. In our adulthood, we're on two legs. And in our aged years, golden, for some reason, we use a cane, and there's our third leg. Yeah,
or a
on
shillelagh.
three
Yeah.
legs. Or a shillelagh when the times come. Yes, exactly. And so yeah, there is that whole mystery. What is man? Right? Um, uh, apart from the measure of all things. Um, so yeah, this is one of those great questions, and that irrational aspect. There's just so many ways to ask that question. If everything was rational, or if everything was deterministic, and a big computer, even though we don't have one, could somehow calculate it all and know from the previous state what the future state of everything would be by tracking the movements of molecules, was sort of the fantasy. Life wouldn't be the same. It just wouldn't be the same if everything added up, if there were no irrational numbers in the number board, right? And this is the thing that even great minds like Albert Einstein are humbled beholding. And it's also something that great minds like Einstein and Goethe and all these ones, they didn't miss this. They were not so so insensitive to the fundamental mystery of everything to forget that at the core of it all, which is to say, not just the core of all creation, but the core of our own experiencing self, is fundamentally mysterious. And that's a good starting place for our science. It might ultimately be the ending place for our science. Um, but we might run through most of the world before we get back there. Looks like the way we're going for it at this point.
Mm. Well, yeah. And I guess in our understanding of madness, not to kind of like lean too heavily on that as a theme, but when we talk about running through this world in our attempt to understand ourselves and understand the universe, that seems like a manifestation of madness, maybe not exclusively, but at least among other things.
Yeah, I mean, it shows us that there's places where our flashlight just won't go, and that there are places inside as well as outside of us that to which that applies. There's places on the bottom of the ocean we're never going to see. There's places in the depths of the human soul that we're never really going to see, at least not that directly, unless you're the
Mhm.
shadow. You remember him? Who knows
That was
what
a
evil
comic,
lurks
right?
in the hearts of men? And the shadow knows. Early radio
Yeah,
show, right?
yeah,
Mild mannered Lamont Cranston, something like that. I'll put the reference for people who want to check it out in the. I'm sure they've got them on the YouTube, as us old folks say.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, there is that question, and I mean, I think that part of that this is connected to this idea about Hitler and why because maybe that ability for someone to manipulate us rhetorically is about that opening of ourselves, and it's about that the door of madness as a potential threat.
I think that's a good segue to what you mentioned earlier about the madness of crowds, which I typically think of as like the the massive IQ drop that happens when people are in a big group together and how weird collective behavior can be. It's not always an IQ drop, but it's often an IQ
No.
drop. But I think you meant something different by it, and we've been talking about the collective unconscious in a way that is a little expansive for me, and so I'm curious about what you meant by the madness of crowds relative to, I think it was my comment about kind of political history being greatly influenced by madness over the years. I'm thinking of like, I assume Genghis Khan had a touch of it. I'm assuming Napoleon had a touch of it. I'm
Yeah,
assuming the Romanovs had a touch.
I'm thinking when I'm thinking of the madness of crowds, I'm not thinking about mobs and riots as much as I'm thinking about this great German philosophy word, the Zeitgeist, which translates directly as time ghost. But it also sort of gets translated to as the spirit of the times, which is, we never think of again, the word spirit shows up, but we never think about it that way. But isn't it curious that language chooses that, right? And so, when Yeats was talking about the uh, the second coming, he wasn't really talking about Jesus' second coming. He was talking about that rough beast's second coming. And the fact that it was slouching to Bethlehem is because Bethlehem was the seat of uh, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. In his days, the East was still more of a mystery and still less, open. But what he was seeing was similar to Nietzsche's idea of the God is dead. Was not, and Nietzsche wasn't all jazzed about that. We should be clear. He was just stating what he was observing, and uh, so that's what he was wondering was what is going to replace this if our moral tenets have been cut loose, if our which is a question we've asked a number of our guests and will undoubtedly do again on future dates, because this is one of the questions of the ground. It's called the grounding problem of morality or ethics, and that is, upon what does it sit is the grounding problem. So uh so yeah, this idea of the spirit of the times. If I'm a conventionalist, right? If I'm like Hart in the dialogue between Hart and Dworkin, and I say, "Well, good and bad, and all of our standards are all just convention. It's all just what everybody thinks and has worked out, and those change over time, so there's nothing written in stone, as it were." Uh,
That is a
well,
lack of focus of attention that makes one open to pernicious influence, by the way, thinking that.
it sure could contribute, but if I'm one of those, then it's like, well, I mean, my boat is kinda cut loose because everything's just convention, and maybe I just wanna have a different convention, you know? And, I would associate that with a spirit of the times, and so that can sort of become a madness of crowds, but a more pernicious madness of crowds. They're not all standing out there with burning torches. They're just everybody going about their lives with that model, that sharing that cognitive model and and all of the implications that it has in value systems and in how we balance our relationships and how we lead our lives and all those practical things. And that all comes in with the spirit of the times. That's why I thought it was interesting in the Hunger Games where uh, my buddy Stanley, when he was all the people that were in the most elite classes, they all had the same fashion that was way overdone, right? And that was clearly an example of the spirit of the times within that class saying, okay, this is what's cool. Sometimes I'll refer to that as an applause system. The other part is it's also very much related to what you can get away with. And that's directly related to which pernicious influences might thrive in any particular epoch based on the zeitgeist that inhabits that epoch. And this Hegelian idea was the phenomenology of spirit, of Geist, with this idea that there is a transition through time, that the zeitgeist morphs from one value system to another value system over time, and whether it does that randomly or whether it's it's um, slouching off to its own Bethlehem to be born somehow
It's evolutionary in some way,
with
yeah.
finalism or something like that. Are we going somewhere? Or are we just riding the bus around town? Yeah. And but so definitions of madness are probably connected directly to that zeitgeist. And the way madness shows up seems to be like, for example, if this is just one of the weird things of history, I will go, Jamie, pull up that video uh, of
Jamie doesn't work for us yet.
yeah, I know. We really need a Jamie. But it's, where people used to have, what do they call it? The tarantella, where people just used to go into fits of mad dancing
Dancing, yeah.
till like they crashed and burned, right? Till they were just like trouts flipping on the floor or something.
Well, yeah, and then you've got speaking in tongues, that happens in certain circumstances, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so there's these things that I'm thinking about this also in terms of Freud and the types of patients that Freud saw. And they're different than the types of patients that psychoanalysts are seeing today. And say Chinese medicine will tell you the same thing. The kinds of problems that we see people with changes through different times of history. And it's tied with everything. It's tied to fashion and it's tied to economics and it's tied to politics and whether there's wars or uprising. So all this stuff is just a big plate of spaghetti tangled together that we could call the zeitgeist, right? Like, kind of what's going on. And it's very hard from one zeitgeist to peer into another and imagine what it's like because you grew up when the pervasive madness of crowds was following a different zeitgeist. Or like that. So that is a bigger madness of crowds than I think we're talking about when we're talking about a subsect. And oh, aren't they crazy? They think birds are really spy devices, and although now New Mexico is using stuffed birds as drones, so if it flies, it spies, folks. And but anyway, I digress. Um, each time has its own crazy, it seems like, and each time has its own habits that cause its own crazy. For example, I missed this in our episode about hats because it's a great reference to hats, and that is directly mad as a hatter, right? And they weren't talking about angry, right? They were talking about loopy. And it was associated, I believe, with mercury, wasn't it? They were using mercury somehow in the
Oh,
process of building making hats.
hmm.
And so they had exposure and they became mad as hatters, right? Oblique Alice in Wonderland reference there, talking about another exploration into a kind of madness through the looking glass, where things make a different kind of crazy sense.
We
Right?
haven't talked about him, I don't think at all on the podcast yet. We
Yeah.
probably should.
Yeah, it's true. What a
Yeah,
character, huh?
yeah.
And
I'm remembering the Screw Tape Letters. That was him, right?
I
Lewis
think that was
Carroll?
C.S. Lewis with Screwtape.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is the interesting connection with Alice in Wonderland is that homie who wrote that, Alice was the daughter of a professor at the same university that Lewis Carroll was working at when he wrote that. And Alice's last name was Lydell. And those of us who are Greek scholars, not that I'm really a Greek scholar, those of us who suffered through many classes of Greek will recognize the name Lydell because he wrote the ever popular Greek lexicon. Lexicons is just a dictionary, so it tells you in English what the Greek words mean and might show you where they show up in the classics. But anyway, so yeah, that's where history kind of folds back in on itself, and I believe it's Oxford that we're talking about. I'll correct that in the show notes if I'm wrong. But uh, yeah, no, there is a whole interesting thing, and again, these are all non-logical dimensions of mind, but that doesn't mean that they don't carry meaning. And isn't that weird?
Yeah. So coming back to Brian Koberger, um, it's funny. The families want him to explain, and of all people, Donald Trump wrote a post on Truth Social that I assume somebody screenshot or he screenshot onto his X account because I don't think he posts on X himself a whole lot, saying that the judge should require an explanation as part of the sentencing procedure and as a requirement of the plea being accepted. And I would love to hear the explanation. And I've watched a lot of interrogations with people suffering from madness because that interests me.
Yeah, yeah,
And the explanation never satisfies.
sure. Well, and often it's not a complete coincidence that often in situations of violence, alcohol is involved. And we've often had the saying within the shamanic community that there are drugs that demand responsibility and drugs that basically people go to be cut loose of responsibility somehow. And I would put alcohol in that category. And so and I know because I used to teach in the penitentiary, and there are people there for murder who will literally tell you, "I have no idea what happened." And they had no reason to lie to me about it. I woke up and there was wreckage all around me. And so somebody was driving, and I'm not talking about somebody who was saying, I don't know what happened to the judge to try to get a sentence. I'm talking about somebody that's already 25 years in. He's got no reason in the world to bullshit anybody or himself. But alcohol was involved, And when he said when he came to, he did, things had happened that he didn't want to have happened, but he didn't know what happened, right? Well, sure sounds to me like, I mean, we know somebody was driving because a lot of wreckage was wrought, but it sounds like an incidence of unconscious material breaking through in a pretty dramatic and destructive way, which
Can't really be explained, yeah.
can't really be explained rationally. I think, though, that, this is where, and I think because of many, many years of ceremonies, one almost comes to a metaphysical understanding of these things because it's not like any one incident is going to explain it. It's like you see that these types of things happen on this plane in this world, the way this game is going down. And there is some, and we've spoken about this before in our episode on suffering. There is some price that we are paying to come to consciousness. And I mean, consciousness in the fullest dimensions, in that way of understanding ourselves. And we're doing that collectively as well as each person individually being on their own project, whether they're undertaking it directly or indirectly. Um, so I kind of have a feeling that some of this is somehow written into the script. Maybe in the
But
Bhagavad
not
Gita it
all?
explains it. Well,
Isn't that what the
uh,
script is? Or what do you
yeah.
mean by the script?
Well, that I don't think that there is a script that is written per se. I do think that I don't think that the universe is
Now we're
determined.
at the metaphysics of it.
Now we're
Yeah,
at the
go ahead.
metaphysics of it, but I think that there are energies that have to be worked out. The specifics of how those work out, I think that's up for grabs. I think that's possibilistic with probabilistic overtones. But the thing that's being expressed or the process that has to be gone through, I think just has certain chapters in the evolution of it. And I think that's what they're getting at with the yugas and with these great epics of history. When the Hopis talk about the different worlds, and they're not unique in that, I might add. Um, they're not just other Native Americans, but there are other traditional worldviews that have a very similar picture on it. And it's not like typical first world Western knowledge where we could say, "Oh yeah, this guy came up with it," and then we've thought about it and we thought, "Yeah, he's right on." So that's the way we think about it. It's more like
I think
we've always known this sort
these
of
are things
knowledge.
that also emerge from the collective unconscious.
Literally, yep, yep, and have over time, and that's why we don't want to lose them because they're all pieces in the puzzle.
Oh,
And
huh.
like
I
as
was just
language,
thinking we can't lose them, but yeah,
well, but like as languages disappear, as the last language speakers and as their traditions disappear, we may lose part of the payload to that. And so now we should be smart enough to be supporting that process to, reinforce that rather than let it pass away. That's
yeah.
just my advision to the
That
race.
might be worth an episode at some point, because I think I agree with you, and I think that's also not how the script is written, as evidenced by the many languages that have already died off. So, so what about that?
Right,
I think is kind of interesting,
right.
but not for today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there's a whole thing there with that mystery of language and the mystery of humans in reality and the linguisticality of reality
Existence.
itself.
Yeah,
Yeah. I can't remember
yeah.
who I ripped that off from, Gadamer maybe.
A phenomenologist, I
One of
think,
those
because it's
phenomenologists. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And but so which is an interesting thing because that's tied up with this idea of mind and matter. And I did finish Bergson's Creative Evolution. Wow. Phew. I think I want to do
Cool.
a reading of it. Um,
Yeah.
but that idea of we've talked about, is something moving up the ladder or is it coming down the ladder? And he explains how the going down and the coming up are mutually interdependent, in a similar way that Bohm later was to say that the explicate order and the implicate order are folded into each other. In
And the way we've talked about evolution and devolution being the yin and yang of how we move forward through time.
balancing spirals, yeah. If you get to the into the really into the Kabbalist theory, they'll show you the tree, the Kabbalah. Well, there's actually a tree that's the mirror image that goes underneath, that goes and it maps all the other directional stuff. So you've got, again, we've got these two spirals idea, you know. So yeah, no, there's a lot going on there. And again, it is the fundamental mystery. And that's why Ramana Maharishi, who I've mentioned before, said you can become enlightened by asking yourself the question, who am I? Because when you come down to I am the fundamental mystery, and everything else is also the fundamental mystery. And then you have the Hindu saying, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma, I am God. Or, as I've referred before, wake up to find out that you are the eyes of the world, right? So then something different happens there. And there's the world is different from that seat.
Mhm.
And that's all about all you can say about it. But or as Han Shan said, try to make it to Cold Mountain,
Mm.
right? Which is his seat where he would attain a different type of consciousness. Try to get there, you know.
Mhm.
But it's tricky. It's rough terrain, you know. Should do one on Cold
Cool.
Mountain too at some point.
Yeah.
We could read some of his
Good.
poems. Yeah, because he's another one. That's I'll put him in the show notes, folks. Our
Yeah,
show
yeah, and
notes are
we'll
like
put
a
it on
bag
our
of goodies, I tell you.
we'll put it in the backlog too.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Well, thank you, Brian.
Sounds good.
Be well.
We'll
Talk to you
see
soon.
everybody later. Bye bye.